Welcome to my Dungeon 52 series. This is video 2 of a 4-video series, and in this video we're going to talk about the goal that I set for writing this adventure, how this goal helped me overcome the obstacles that I have with solo dungeon crawling. And I'm going to finish this video by talking about the setting or the theme I have for my dungeon that links back to my goal. So let's get into this. Welcome to Solitary RPG. When I set out to write this adventure for Caves and Catacombs, I had a lot of different ideas. And because I had all these ideas bouncing around my head, it was throwing me off course. I knew I had to write a goal so that I could narrow down my focus just on the goal that I set to just keep me on track. Playing all the games that I've played over the years, you just get a lot of different ideas, and that's something that I needed to avoid. Needed to be very specific about what I was trying to create for this adventure. So I wrote a goal. My goal is to create a system neutral living solo dungeon adventure to have the framework completed by the end of 2025. So that's the goal that I set. Let me break down the concepts that I put into my goal. The first thing is I went system neutral. Yes, I am writing the adventure for Caves and Catacombs. However, I'm putting all this effort in, I'm putting all this work in, and I want to be able to use this tool for other games. So system neutral was the best way to go. So that kept me very focused on what I put into the adventure I am creating. And to me, that was also very important because why put in all this effort and energy for one specific game? So I created the concept of just being system neutral. So I'm not going to use any specific rules from one game or one tool. I'm just using general information so that I can use this adventure in any of the games that I play moving forward. The second part is I want it to be a living adventure. And what I mean by that is I want it to continue to change over time. If you go in a room and you pick up a piece of treasure and you continue on in the dungeon, that room now changes. That piece of treasure is no longer located in that room. Your character goes on, they die in another room. Now that treasure has been relocated into that room. That's what I'm trying to accomplish with the adventure that I am writing. This is, I'm going to say, a little bit of a journaling adventure, but not like full on journaling where you're writing out pages of text. You go in a room, you interact with that environment, something changes about that environment, and then if you go into another room and your PC is defeated in combat, now your PC is dead in that room, and whatever treasures and items they have now are located in that room. So this way, if I want to play again and I have another PC go in, they might find the previous PC and all that information will be in there. The way I'm doing that is how I am writing the adventure itself. This is just a simple little journal that I'm using, and in the back I have all the cards from the deck listed out, and when you pull a card, you'll have one page that gives you descriptive information about what the PC sees. I'm going to have some room suggestions because the way I'm using my process is the value of the card tells you how many spaces the room has, and this creates different room shapes so you're not locked into one shape. You read it, and then you'll flip to the front of the book, And then this section will have what actually takes place. A little bit like a choose your own adventure game, however, a little more agency on the player to make important decisions, take actions, and then continue moving forward. So that's the way I wanted to set this up for a living game. If you go into this room, which is the Four Hearts, and you have this combat, and you defeat this combat, then if another PC comes in, there'll be a chance that that creature's no longer there because you've already defeated it. So maybe the remains of that creature's there, depending on how long you take between games. I do feel tracking time is important, and if you defeat it, let's say another PC comes in 2 weeks later in your game systems that you're playing. If you're waiting a couple weeks, 2 weeks later you come back in, maybe the remains are still there, and that can add to the adventure with some senses of like smell and sight, things that you see. And that's how I'm making this a living adventure. Is you're going to take notes as you play about changes or things that your PCs do during gameplay, and that will affect it. If they complete the whole dungeon, then you can set up a whole new adventure with a new goal to accomplish for the game that you're playing. It sounds a little complicated and it's hard to explain 100%. Some of this stuff is just my thought process, but that's what I'm working on. So that's why it's called a goal, because I'm working on trying to create this new style of adventuring and making it more of a living game. So that way I just feel a little bit more vested in the tool that I'm using to play my games. So that's the first part. The next part of my goal is I want this to be a solo adventure. One of the challenges I have, well, I think most of us have, is with pre-written adventures, there's a lot of things with adjusting the encounters and putting in some extra effort while you're playing to make sure that your one PC can take on that challenge. I'm just keeping in mind that this is solo, so the challenges and the encounters that I'm putting in, I want to make sure that they are hard, not impossible, but hard, and that it really pushes my PC to make really difficult decisions on the actions that they take. And then this is going to be a dungeon adventure. So everything I am working on is about creating a dungeon adventure, a dungeon crawl, just moving in that direction. And I just am working on the framework, and I want to have the framework done by the end of the year. Doesn't mean my adventure is going to be done by the end of the year. That's why my goal is very specific to what I'm trying to accomplish, to help me narrow in my focus so that way I'm not distracted by too many options and things, directions that I can go. I just want to stay focused on one specific thing, dungeon adventure. Also, the concepts of a living game and also a solo adventure. That's the goal that I set, and that's what I've been working for. Setting those types of goals when writing your adventure can help just narrow in your focus and keep you on track. I've set a lot of goals in my life, and sometimes you aren't very specific in your goals, and it causes you to go in a lot of different directions. And that is one way to fail setting goals, is not having a very specific goal that you're working on. With that being said, and everything that I've done so far, I feel I am on track with the direction that I was going. The other part of this goal setting is I was able to overcome some of the challenges or obstacles that I face when I'm playing solo dungeon adventures. I love dungeon crawling. I think it's a lot of fun, and it adds a lot of discovery when you're playing, because you flip a card, turn a page, you read a room, and then you take actions, and then you move on to the next room. For me, it's just one of my favorite ways of playing RPGs. However, there are challenges when playing solo. The first challenge is you read the room, you have all your information, and then you move on. That's good, but doesn't leave a lot of decision making. You have all the information, and then you take your actions, and then you move on. I wanted to shift a little bit and make things a little bit different. So, what I'm going to do is go back into my journal. So, we have the Seven of Hearts, we have this room information. This is just kind of a snapshot of the room. So, when your PCs walk in, they see everything. This is like the glimpse, a few seconds of looking around once you've opened a door. Then you have to make decisions. That is why at the bottom of every one of the entries, I haven't finalized the words yet. This one says, what do you want to do? Some of them say, what does your PC want to do? I'm kind of adding in that choose your own adventure thought process where you read a passage and then you make decisions and then you move to that decision. However, I'm doing it from a GM's perspective. So if you were sitting at a table and you were playing a game, you enter a room, the GM would give you quick descriptive information. Then ask you, what do you want to do? What do your PCs do? What's the actions you want to take? What I want to do is make some dice rolls. So I enter a room, I read the descriptive information, I make decisions on what I want to do, I make some dice rolls, I log them on a piece of paper, and then I flip to the further description of that room, and this will give me any dice modifiers, any further information of encounters or traps or anything that might be in that room. And then I would apply the decisions I made to the results of what is actually in the room. And I just like how this might play out. I've played this, test played it. It's been a lot of fun. It still needs work. I'm far from being finished with this adventure that I'm writing, but that's my concept is enter a room, you get some information. What does your PC want to do? You make some dice rolls. I want to, search. I want to look for traps or look for treasure. I want to use some stealthy moves to maybe go around an encounter or sneak up on an encounter, or I'm just going to go right into combat. And you start making some rolls based on the system that I'm going to be using. If I'm going to jump right into combat, I'm going to make an initiative roll, and then I'm going to flip over to the further description information. So the further descriptive information at the front of the book would be basically the GM saying, all right, this is what you've walked into. And then you fight it out, or if you fail a search roll, maybe you trigger a trap. Or if you're doing a search roll, you don't find the treasure, whatever. But the front section will have all the modifications to dice rolls. The back section is just going to be room description. That's where I'm at with creating this adventure. Just want to make it a little bit more than just room description, take action, and move on. The other obstacle I wanted to overcome with a dungeon adventure is how the dungeon is created. I like cards. I think cards are fantastic. You can lay them all out and you can start your adventure and you can explore and discover things. I also like the 4 Against Darkness charts where you roll and you get a room size, you write it down. But there's no agency in that. You just get what you get. That's what you do. And sometimes cards run over each other, or you run out of paper and then you're just supposed to backtrack and go in. And I don't know, it's good. It's a good way of doing it, but it doesn't leave you much room for creating the dungeon. You're kind of just locked into whatever system you're using. And that's why all my rooms that I have been creating based on their value, I want to come up with different shapes. And I want to be able to put those shapes in so I can keep the dungeon growing. And if I get close to an edge of a page and I pull a corridor card, I can move in another direction, keeping that dungeon going, and I don't know, just having more agency in that creation of the dungeon and making it just look a little bit different than just a bunch of squares and straight corridors and running out of page or running off the table or taking up a lot of space on my table with all the cards laid out. So this will be an adventure I will draw out. And because of my concept of this being a living game, that those rooms will be changing, and I can then use that adventure again and continue playing. It's hard to do that with cards, mainly because you got them all laid out. Yeah, take a picture, you can document, and then set it back up. And having it on a piece of paper and I'm drawing it out my way, I will have that adventure for future use, and I can come back to the same game with a new PC. That's where I'm at with all that. Obviously, you're seeing a bunch of different room shapes, and I think that is going to be one of the key elements of the adventure is not getting locked into everything being squared. I'm using half grids and things like that just to create uniqueness to the shape, which is actually really important because of the theme that I created for the adventure. This is one of the obstacles that was important to me for the adventure, is being able to design the dungeon as I play based on the cards that I draw and the rooms that I design. So that's where I'm at with that. The other obstacle that I wanted to overcome is also tied to the theme. I want to keep my encounters very specific to the theme of the adventure. Lots of tables and charts available on the market. You have tons of options that you can use for any of your games. But when you're in a dungeon and you're adventuring around, sometimes you might run across a goblin, then you run across a skeleton, then a lich, and something else, and you're kind of like bouncing all over the place. I kept my encounter list specific to the theme that I am creating, so that way I feel a little bit more immersed, that everything is tied together and I'm not just getting random encounters. Yes, sometimes that's a lot of fun when you don't know what you're going to come across, but to me, it breaks the immersion a little bit. If I'm in a dungeon of undead, which is the theme of the dungeon I'm writing, and you run across I'll just say goblin. To me, goblins would not be hanging out with the undead. Just thematically doesn't necessarily. I understand it can happen in a fantasy world because it's fantasy and you can do whatever you want in a fantasy and you can make up any story. I just wanted it to all be tied together. So I kept my charts for random encounters all specific to undead encounters. That way it just felt a little bit more thematic of a game. And since I've been talking about the theme and my goals, one of the key elements was I also wanted to make the dungeon a living dungeon. So let me share with you my theme. The theme of my dungeon is that it actually was a kingdom, and it was a kingdom in a forest, and everything was good for many, many, many years. But the king got a little bit greedy, started cutting down more trees and clearing the forest for more farmland, and the tree became aggressive towards the kingdom and started growing rapidly and caused the farmlands to fail, and eventually took over the kingdom and overgrew the kingdom, collapsing it and creating more ruins, but still you're going from room to room, corridor to corridor, and adventuring. It's not completely destroyed. the trees kind of grew over, and the roots of the trees are growing into the kingdom and on the walls. So when you're adventuring, the rooms have that feeling of decay. And also, you know, there's roots. Those are going to be one of the encounters, is that the roots can actually are living and will actually, you know, take hold of your PCs. And to me, that just makes it more evolved. So that way, if you go back and play the game all over again, it's always changing because the trees are alive and changing the dungeon itself. So that way you have some replayability in the game, and thematically it works with the adventure. That's the basic theme of the dungeon. I'm also saying that there was an evil power that took over the forest and caused the kingdom to collapse, because that ties into some of the adventures for the different cards that you can draw. Is there is an evil power that you're overcoming. That's why everything will be undead, or we'll be dealing with the undead type of encounters. I created a life cycle for the undead encounters, pulling from the life cycle that I created for an adventure I did called the Acid Queen. The way it works is that a normal person can enter into the dungeon and then become possessed or obsessed with the environment. So they're still people, but they're not acting themselves, and they are just kind of obsessed with being in the dungeon. So that will be one type of encounter, just fighting a normal person. But because of their obsession, they start transforming, and they'll transform into a zombie, and then they'll transform into a ghoul. Then they'll become what I call a blood skeleton, where they've shed all of their flesh and organs, but their bones are red, and they are learning to become warriors. And then there's a skeleton warrior. There will also be the big bad in a dungeon of a major encounter, a boss encounter that kind of oversees everything. This could be anything from a priest that is helping keep all of this going, or some sort of wizard or lich. Any of those types of things can be the big boss. But the concept is there a life cycle for the encounters in the dungeon, and there's just different stages of that life cycle, and those create the different types of encounters. I went with very simple concepts with the undead, so that way I can use this in any system that I play, because most gaming systems, most, not all, have undead encounters that you can come across, and that way I can just pull those out, and those would be my encounters. That's everything I wanted to share in this video. Is I set a goal to help me stay focused on what I was creating, and then I took that focus to help me develop everything that I wanted in the dungeon, including the theme. I want it to be a living game, and I want it to be a living dungeon that's always evolving and changing, to help with some of the replayability. So if I kind of exhaust an adventure but I want to play again, in my mind I can easily just say, you know, the couple years have passed and the dungeon evolved a little bit. That's why it would be a different dungeon. Some of those encounters will repopulate if it's been a long time, but if I go right back in, I have my dungeon written out. I can go right back in and I can keep those changes there. So it gives me some options on how I want to approach my game. That is what I wanted to share in this video. And in the next video, I'm going to go over the mechanics that I created specifically for how the dungeon will be created. It's not just going to be simply pulling a card, you're good to go. There's going to be little mechanics to give you more of that agency, so that you can design the dungeon to keep it going and not run off the page and have to backtrack a long ways to find another pathway. Still a lot of work needs to be done. This is not a complete project. That's not my goal. My goal is just simply to have the framework down, and then once I have all the framework down, my next goal will be to finalize and actually get this all written out so that I can start using it. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.